international media regarding Meng Wanzhou case. And of course, he's well qualified in that capacity. He himself is one of the lead partner and founder of the law firm Kurland and Tube. He has he's an editor-in-chief of the Lexbase, which is the monthly legal newsletter, very professionalized for a number of decades regarding immigration, citizenship, related legal issues. As I understand, there's a huge following. On public related works, he has been served in different committees in the House of Commons and the Senate, being called to testify on immigration and citizenship related matters. He has been awarded by the Senate on his work in these related areas. And he's also volunteering a long list I cannot repeat here, too many, of volunteer works on different citizenship, immigration related issues, Jewish Congress, among many other distinguished, roles. And certainly he has been very, very active in the media. And my understanding is Richard is also very, very familiar with China-related issues. He, in fact, over his distinguished career, has worked with Chinese different entities regarding some of the legal issues. So without further ado, I would like to ask Richard to come in to summarize for us what is this latest phase about Ms. Meng Wanzhou regarding the argument her team put up on the extradition request by the United States. Other than the last phase, what about the whole more than 2 years of the entire process? Could you put us, into this context and saying where things are and where might things go legally speaking? Because many of us are not familiar with all the legal jargons and we don't read the details. So please go ahead, Richard. Thank you.
What a buildup. Oh, my goodness. So look, let's keep it simple. Let's start with the framework. There's an agreement between the United States and Canada regarding extradition. This agreement is not enforceable, frankly, in a court of law. In Canada, we have the Extradition Act. And very importantly, Section 23 of the Extradition Act, and that's about as technical as I'll ever get, says that a minister can, at any time, for any reason, terminate an extradition case. Rare in Canadian law do you have an amalgamation of the judicial system and the political system that's case specific. In other words, you can't have a minister shut down a criminal case. That's not allowed. But you can have a political minister shut down an extradition case. And that's what this is all about. On the one hand, we have, over the last almost 3 years, undergone an extradition process. And as pointed out at the outset, we're at the end of the initial phase of extradition. They connected the dots between the facts, the law, the argument, and the judge is going to decide what to do with Ms. Meng. At the same time, we're in the middle of a federal election in Canada. Plus, the game-changing event occurred January 20th, when there was a transition in the American White House to President Biden. So those are the factors, and the summary boils down to this. The judge in the case is going to come out in October, thereabouts, with not the decision, a date for the decision. And even then, the minister, because of Canadian law, will have the final say. So if the court says, bye-bye, you're off to the United States, window or aisle, it's the political minister that says you're getting on board or you're not getting on board. If the Crown wins the defense, Ms. Meng will surely take advantage of the multi-year appeal. We're talking 5, 6, 7 more years in court. So that's where we are. That's the context. And this thing is very live. We'll go into details after. Oh.
Sorry, my mic. Yes. Thank you, Richard. This is a very good summary. I have, we're going to do follow-up discussions with everyone, but just very quick, one quick follow-up question. Do you see the prospects now during the election or immediately after the election, the Minister of Justice actually could come in to intervene? Because you emphasized, I know from your previous interviews, you emphasized repeatedly that the minister can stop the so-called authority to proceed at any time without even giving any explanation, because it's a procedure itself, right?
Yes, and I can't wait to hear from my fellow panelists quickly. But just to answer, it will be up to the political advisors, to the Prime Minister, to use or not use this channel changer. If the polls go against the incumbent government, what better way to create a political opportunity than to terminate litigation and welcome the two Michaels on Vancouver International Airport tarmac, shaking hands with the Prime Minister? Goodness gracious, what a poll bump.
Okay, that sounds very interesting. But I do, you didn't mention, but I did mean to ask in the opening part, because the Chinese side, as you know, upheld the death sentence of the Canadian on charge of the drug trafficking, Robert Schellenberg. They refused the defense plea for the death sentence, as well as the 11-year sentencing of one of the two Michaels, Michael Spavor. What's your take, just quickly, legally, on that one? You know.
Well, the fast answer: this is Chinese law. Don't know, not licensed.
Okay,
we'll wait and see.
All right. Well, thanks, Richard. We'll come back on a range of issues that we're going to do the discussion. Now I'm turning to Margaret Carnish. For our viewers who may not know Margaret, who is also a first time on our show, welcome, Margaret, to the show of IPD panel. Thank you for doing this. Margaret Carnish is a distinguished honorary senior fellow with the Institute of Asian Research in the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs at UBC. She is now very interested in broader Canada, China, US economic and trade issues, because she has worked in recent years on more sectoral-based advice, consulting the different entities in Canada and in China. But she, before all this, Margaret was a career diplomat with the Canadian Foreign Service, and I've known Margaret for many years. But I remember at one point, Margaret, you wrote an excellent paper about Canada-China relations. I don't know, that might be 10, 15 years ago. And I was asked by the Canada-China Business Council to go down to Calgary to chair a session to discuss your paper. And I'm, of course, very happy to do that. After I showed up, there were at least like 4 or 5 Bennett Jones lawyers coming to listen. I was actually curious what's going on, but the next time I know you're in Beijing, being the Bennett Jones China representative, and you did an excellent job for them. And now Margaret is back living in Vancouver Island. And I would like to ask Margaret about, according to your background, you know, with all what's going on with the two Michaels case, with Meng case, what does this mean in the broader context of Canada-China relations. We're in the middle of an election, Richard referred to it. And then there's this complex issue of U.S. factor, to what extent Canada's foreign policy now is following U.S. To treat China as some kind of a potential rivalry or enemy. So could you enlighten our viewers, Margaret, about all these range of issues? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wenran. It's impossible to consider the options for Canada in future relations with either China or the US without understanding this big picture. We're in the midst of a global transition in which the two great powers contest both interests and values. And the US specifically, the global hegemon, is seeking to curb the rise of China as the leading power in Asia. President Biden has extended the economic measures introduced by President Trump, and the intense rivalry between the great powers merely depletes the international oxygen available to other powers to pursue their interests. China is already the engine of regional economic growth and integration, and the largest trading partner of each country and the anchor on most Asian supply chains. The US isn't even a member of either RCEP or the CPTPP, the two regional trade groupings, and Asia is widely expected to generate the majority of global GDP over the coming decades. But on the other hand, the US has strong treaty relationships with the leading states of the region of Asia, and its decoupling strategy in high tech is unquestionably a major challenge to China. Militarily, the US ability to prevail in Asia is no longer absolute. China's aerial denial missile strategies make active engagement risky, highly risky. The US-China rivalry in Asia may well not result in any clear-cut victory for the United States. So given these real power deficits, the US has forged a soft power coalition, the Democracy 10, G7 plus South Korea, Australia, and India. Initiatives include efforts to weaken China's regional role and legitimacy at its borders. Hong Kong, Taiwan, Xinjiang, it's all focused on this. Hobbling its innovation, China's innovation in advanced tech, reducing its influence in global institutions, and constraining efforts to modify liberal human HR norms. The US effort to rally treaty partners is powerful, but having mixed results. Asian and European leaders both seek to provide verbal support to the Americans while minimizing the damage to their bilateral relationships with China. And most seek an outside power to counterbalance China in the region, but not to destabilize and confront the region. Each power has its own coalition priorities. For Australia, it's the US support in resisting China's trade coercion. For Japan, it's continued US military support in the Pacific. For the EU, it's US support for WTO reform. For Canada, it's the withdrawal of the Hmong extradition request or some solution to the issue. But the Achilles heel for the US leadership of the coalition is President Biden's domestic political situation. The Republicans seek to out-hawk the Democrats on China at every turn, especially in the run-up to the 2022 elections. President Biden has no room for maneuver. He is unable to expend the political capital necessary to deliver on allied priorities. Also, the biggest headache for the allies is the possibility of a Republican president in 2024, resulting in a dramatic realignment of America's international direction. As time passes, these factors will affect the willingness of allies to support requested US missions. Canada must also consider the severe damage to critical domestic interests when we act on US requests without sufficient attention to first protecting our own interests. These, to the extent that it's possible in the situation, these include the request to extradite Madam Meng, the massive cost to the Canadian telecom industry, government and consumers in eventual G5 implementation, resulting from the switch to the few other global producers of G5 equipment, and the damage to Canada's, perhaps most importantly, the damage to Canada's innovation infrastructure as US government aims to push Chinese researchers out of global high-tech innovation and manufacturing ecosystems, winnowing out Chinese scientists and PhD students on grounds of connections to Chinese government and their large corporations, state-owned enterprises. These are key issues which we may have to discuss, we may have the time to discuss later. Regardless of efforts to constrain and isolate it, China will become the largest global economy within the decade, whether Western or not. Small and medium-sized countries and advanced and emerging markets alike have core economic interests engaged with China, and this will continue to be a critical priority for them. This will eventually be true of Canada, although surveys suggest Canadians remain reluctant to recognize our position as a Pacific nation, preferring to look south and east as we have always done. This tendency is exacerbated by discomfort with China and lack of familiarity with Asia in general. We may have to experience slowing economic performance before we see changes in Canadian attitudes. If the US Democratic coalition serves primarily to heighten geopolitical tensions without delivering needed benefits, the partners may well shift their focus towards collaborating with like-minded states on a raft of needed international agreements and standard setting. Our deep immersion in US mainstream and social media embeds us in the US perception of its national interest. As a privileged neighbor, we're accustomed to thinking we have similar interests to the US. We now need to formulate an independent view of when and how our interests diverge under great power competition. We have long sheltered in the advantages of the US dominance and are now exposed to its drawbacks. It's time to take responsibility for our own core interests, recognizing our responsibilities to the United States, but aware and focused with respect to our own interests. Canada is treated as a minor power by both the United States and China. Minor power status is when a major power neither consults nor accommodates. We're certainly a minor power to China. We're not in their region. We're within the close embrace of the United States. We're not irrelevant, but we're not permitted to flout China's core interests without consequences, which is what we're undergoing. Some examples of the US failure to accommodate our interests include the steel and aluminum tariffs, forced renegotiation of NAFTA, the vassal state language inserted at the 11th hour in the USMCA agreement, giving US veto power over any future Canadian trade deal with China, no help on Madam Meng, or the Michigan Pipeline Treaty violations. In light of this, Canada must adapt to its very narrow room for maneuver. First and foremost, we must avoid damaging and unforced errors, such as arresting Madam Meng, by anticipating the interests and the moves of both China and the US. We need to focus on our essential interests and only our essential interests, and devote the necessary resources to realizing them. Clearly, this is limited, and a deeply pragmatic approach would represent a major change in our mindset, which is typically oriented towards principles. Canada's interest in the evolution of a peaceful, multipolar international order, that's our interest. Finding ways to mitigate the collateral damage of great power rivalry means working with like-minded powers, especially in East Asia and Europe. Our credibility will depend on being an independent and insightful participant, promoting the participation of both China and the United States in the global issues important to us. Standards in data and technology regulation, cybersecurity, global health, space, etc. Climate change, obviously. The path towards the multipolar order seems closed at the moment, but it could open as the practical implications of a global trade and technological divide, which is what we're looking at now, and increased military tensions become clearer to the world. That's what I wanted to say.
Oh, all right, Margaret, you covered a lot of issues. We'll come back to them, but very quickly, you said we are now being seen as minor power, Canada. We used to know and think ourselves as the middle power. I mean, are you saying we're actually sliding our position vis-a-vis? I mean, both powers were no longer seen as more formidable as a middle power of some kind?
Well, I think in middle power, in great power competition, the great powers are totally focused on their own interests. So virtually everybody's a minor power to them.
Okay, yeah.
But within that context, we're obviously, I think the shock to us is that we're a minor power to the Americans. I think we realize we're a minor power to the Chinese.
All right. I'm pretty sure our viewers might pick that up, but we'll pick up other issues. I have a list here during the discussion. Very good opener. Thank you so much, Margaret. Now, I would like to welcome Daniel Bell, another old friend, Professor Daniel Bell, who is actually joining us now past 11 o'clock Beijing time, and in near Shandong's Qingdao major city. Daniel is a Canadian academic, for many years been working and teaching in China, and he's currently the Dean of the School of Political Science and Public Administration in Shandong University, which is a very reputable top-layer university. And he, for many years, still is teaching and affiliated with another top university, Tsinghua University. And my understanding is Daniel trained as a philosopher, but has gone into a broader range of development issues, comparative development, democracy, human rights. I wouldn't have time to list all Daniel's publications. These are mostly single-authored, large volume books of academic in nature, published by Princeton University Press, by Oxford, and he's actually serious editor regarding human ethics with Princeton's publisher as well. I think in our academic world of political science, Daniel has been known around the world for reaching China as an alternative development model to the generally understood the prevailing Western development model. So he wrote back in 2015, the China model as an alternative, which stirred up a huge ongoing debate about China's development experience, what it means in terms of a meritocracy-based political system. And my understanding is that the latest book, Daniel out with his colleague, is along those lines about the good hierarchy of a society, what it can do in terms of generating good results of governance. But very glad against this background, because Daniel, you're in China, we're here in Canada, you lived there for years. Tell our viewers about what you see in China, the Chinese official, unofficial, academic, policymakers, your friends, how they react to all this, the Meng's case, Canada, the two Michaels, and of course, your own analysis. You follow this very closely. So Daniel, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Wenran, for the kind introduction. One thing to note about Canadians in China is that generally we're held in very high regard, and it's because of one person, Norman Bethune. You know, he was in China in the struggle against the when Japan was invading China, and he basically sacrificed his life. And then at the time, you know, before Mao assumed power, he wrote a famous eulogy honoring Norman Bethune, and basically saying that he holds a true spirit of serving other people, Wei Renming Fu. And every single Chinese child reads this in elementary school. Probably you did as well, Weiran,
Of
right?
course.
Yeah. So whenever you go in China and you meet taxi drivers, they say, wow. And you say, first they ask me, oh, are you American? And then I say, no, I'm, and then they're a bit nervous. And I said, no, Canadian. Wow. Immediately they're relieved. And then they say, wow, Norman Bethune. And there's a kind of, we're held in a kind of, we're viewed as charming, yes, a minor power, but willing to serve other people. A little bit changed though when Miss Meng was arrested, and that was a big shot against the kind of how Canadians are viewed in China, and we were viewed as more blindly following the kind of American agenda, wanting to keep the Chinese kind of rise down, right? I mean, because there was a struggle against Huawei, and Miss Meng was viewed as the kind of representative of Huawei, and this was a way of keeping her down. And I haven't, frankly, I mean, I meet Chinese from many different, classes and perspectives and diverse perspectives. I haven't met anyone who says, wow, it's only about the rule of law. I mean, people here say, of course, it's an attempt by the Americans to keep China down. And Miss Meng was held as a hostage. Now, whether or not, probably, the two Michaels were held in retaliation against that. But from a Chinese perspective, they're all hostages, right? So of course, as Richard was saying, it's not just a matter of rule of law in the sense that the Minister of Justice in Canada has the political authority, and also from a legal perspective, it's perfectly fine to release Miss Meng. So that hasn't been done. So it's a political decision, right? And the Chinese people, I think know that. So what can be done? I mean, there's two perspectives in Canada, as far as I can understand. One is that we are a kind of U.S. ally, which is true. The U.S. does a lot to protect our security, and that's a good thing, right? And the other is that we're also independent and we have our own foreign policy, which is also true. So it seems to me there's a kind of middle way, that yes, we recognize the U.S. does a lot to protect our security, and we're grateful for that. Means we could spend more on social welfare, less on military weapons and so on. So thank you. But doesn't mean you have to blindly follow no matter what the U.S. government does, no matter how immoral it is, right? And sometimes we have opposed the U.S., right? Like in the invasion of Iraq, the Canadian Parliament courageously opposed that, right? And of course, the Pierre Trudeau, when he was Prime Minister, was famous for occasionally opposing the U.S. But now the Canadian government is not doing it; they're blindly following the U.S., which is a very terrible thing from all. From the Canadian national interest perspective. So, okay, well, some people say, wow, if we release Miss Meng now in some sort of deal with two Michaels, that would encourage more hostage taking. From the Chinese perspective, they're all hostages, including Miss Meng. What would happen if Miss Meng was released? It would be huge kind of sigh of relief for Canadians in China, because now we feel under pressure, frankly, because of this thing. If Miss Meng was released, Canadians in China would feel, wow, finally we could be kind of normal again in kind of the old Norman Bethune days. Even in my case, I'm dean of a college, in Shandong University. It's a good university, very good university. Frankly, it's a province of 100 million people and with a top university in China. I wanted to resign as dean because I've been doing it for 4 years. But I was told, no, you can't do it now, because if you resign as dean, it would send a message that you're just doing it because of bad Canada-China relations. So you should stay on as dean to show that it's not that bad, Even things like I wanted to go back to Canada in September. I canceled my trip. Why? Because Canada doesn't recognize Chinese vaccines. I'm from the COVID point of view, we're like the safest country in the world now, right? If I were to go back to Canada, I would have to be quarantined for 2 weeks. And it doesn't make any sense, right? There's this anti-Chinese feeling now, which is just blind. So what would happen if Miss Meng was released? Canada-China relations would immediately improve. Those of Canadians in China would feel much more relaxed. we could go back to the old days. We could have good economic relations. We could have good educational relations with China. We could learn from each other in a productive way. And we just, so I don't understand what's happening. Why is the Canadian government not, releasing Meng, even though they have the authority to do so? I mean, I can understand, and this is where I'm maybe fellow panelists are much more, and also our chair, can understand much more than me. Is it just that the kind of anti-communist vote in China is more powerful, that the anti-communists in Canada vote according to their anti-communism? So that's why the liberals are worried about it? I mean, I don't understand what is motivating this current, is it just irrationality, or is it because they're worried about the anti-communist vote in Canada? I mean, the reasonable people in Canada, they don't vote according to that, but the anti-communists might have a strong kind of reason to vote against, against any government that would release Miss Meng. Is that what's going on? I don't understand. Please explain to me. This is my question to the fellow panelists and to the audience.
All right, Daniel, thank you very much. I may just as well, by following up with you, and then go back to Margaret, and then go back to Richard. Just to pick up on what you said, Daniel, I can see you can give us a sense as being a Canadian academic in China. But I do have actually two related questions just from what you said. One is more factual. Inform our viewers, being in China, I don't think the two Michaels cases are being much widely known by the Chinese public, because I don't think there's a lot of reporting, and yet it's a huge issue here in Canada, right? So how do you see, tell us about this gap of perceptions, because they're passionate about Ms. Meng, I can see in social media, official media, but they know very little about the two Michaels. Is that the case? That's the first factual question. The other is, you're saying,
Sorry, one question. Can we go one question at a time, please?
Yeah, okay, yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I mean,
yeah.
Just for that, I mean, in a way, it might be true as a factual point, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, the people in charge know what's going on, and they'd be more than amenable to some sort of deal that would save the faces of all sides, Okay. It doesn't matter what the public thinks. The people in charge know there might be some sort of possibility of a deal. Let's think of a deal that saves the face of all sides. That's fine. Yeah. Well, the other question related to this, I'm sitting here in Canada, as Margaret and Richard as well. I can tell you the public opinion, very negative overall on China, primarily driven by the treatment of the two Michaels. There will be people listening to your opening statement saying, how dare you to say they're the same as hostages, because we are told here in Canada, primarily, that the Meng case is simply a rule of law, and the two Michaels are hostages. These are actually said by our ministers, by our prime minister. How do you respond to that kind of accusation or criticism? Yeah. Well, the two Michaels arguably probably would not be in jail now were not for the jailing of Miss Meng. So that's the connection, whatever labels we want to use. Okay. And in the future, the way to resolve this is to have some sort of deal that will lead to release of the all three M's. The rest is all details as far as I'm concerned. Okay. Yeah. All right, Daniel, thanks. Just pause on that. We'll come back to you soon. Margaret, if you can unmute yourself, because from what we're talking about with Daniel, your opening statement touched on so many issues. We're no longer middle power. We are seen as minor, tiny powers. Yeah, the other question is the opinion of the middle. Now, so regarding another word of middle, what you articulated regarding Canada's interest, which is not, from my understanding of you're saying, in many cases, very different from that of American foreign policy.
objectives, right? These views, I share many. I would say like 2 years ago, that's a middle ground of some sort, pro-engagement, look at the Canadian interest, distinguish that from American ones, especially the Trump administration at the time. But today, with the Biden administration in place, are these opinions are still considered middle ground views, or are actually being marginalized to be pushed further to the left and saying, no, we cannot do those things anymore? China, as Minister Champin and others mentioned, China's today is no longer the China of 2016. So what is your take on that one? We're no longer this pro-engagement view of Canada having a bit of independent foreign policy is no longer the mainstream or the middle ground.
I quite agree that my views, I don't know, it's pro-engagement, it's just having an independent view of what our interest is. And certainly not treating China as an enemy, which I think I think Trump moved the American political debates so far in one direction that, and the Republican Democratic, the only thing they agree on, the only area of partisan agreement is on anti-China. And so my argument is Canada can't get sucked into that American viewpoint, and we are sucked into it by virtue of the nonstop exposure we have to American media. It's not anybody's fault, it's just a fact. We now see things from an American perspective, deeply American perspective. And people thought that President Biden would have a different perspective on this than President Trump, but actually all of the issues have been maintained. All of the measures have been maintained. I can't think of one that's been suspended. They've been maintained and expanded. So we're looking at a US administration that sees an enemy, rival or enemy. And it's not in Canada's interest. And I don't think, I think because we're the most exposed to the American opinion, we see it that way. We lack the skepticism that the other allies have towards what's going on in the United States.
But the politicians would go with the flow of the public opinion. The public opinion is very negative on China, and people say, well, utilitarian wise, and that's what people want, that people would say. I mean, the election dynamics is very clear from the platforms of different parties. If the Conservatives, Aaron O'Toole, come into power with Michael Chong and all that, we will become the second Australia, which is very closely following the US in confronting or competing with China. And the cooperation part of the 3C is not followed up. I mean, how do we deal with that dynamics with the public opinion, I mean, so low? Also, I mean, okay, we have different views with Americans, but Guy St. John, the former ambassador to China, just wrote an op-ed a few days ago in the Globe and Mail, and basically saying Canada should join with the United States, Australia, and other countries to do sectoral sanctions confronting China, saying if one country stops trading with China on one sector, everybody else should not go beyond the traditional export limit. So therefore, China can be dealt with. Do you see that's possible? I mean, you do a lot of sectoral related economic research and advice to people. Does that, as a policy, can be implemented with Americans?
No. I don't think that the measures in that it's Guy Saint-Jacques is the ambassador. I don't think they're very practical. I think they are essentially get even, not get even. They're built on the enormous frustration the Canadians have about the two Michaels. They're looking for something, but like the suggestion that you move the Winter Olympics to Vancouver, Whistler, and Seattle, enormously impractical, phenomenally expensive for the Canadians, and specifically for the cities in the province, and then to say nothing of the exposure to the health risk. It's these plans that keep coming out in the newspaper, and they are related to the election campaign, I agree. These suggestions are all ill-considered, and they're going to inconvenience Canada, not get the Michaels home. They have nothing to do with getting the Michaels home.
I think that's an important point, how to get Michaels home. And Daniel also passionately mentioned that. So on that point, I want to move to Richard. I can see the clock is ticking. Richard, coming back to the Meng case, I really appreciated and followed very closely all your comments past 2 year plus. Very, very on the mark. But I cannot help but challenging you on one point. Last November, Wall Street Journal reported supposedly a plea bargain deal was going on between U.S. Department of Justice with Meng Wanzhou, her team, or Huawei. If I'm not mistaken, you came out and saying they will do it. They will jump into it. They will pay the fine. They will acknowledge God, and they will get back to home. That has not happened. What is your take now? Tell us, our viewers, about this dynamics of a so-called plea bargain. Obviously, many other ordinary enterprises, individuals would just jump in, but it looks like Huawei or Meng Wanzhou or her father are no ordinary. Is that what the case is here?
Well, in context. So when this case initially occurred, one should appreciate the context. It was a pre-election year. The standard operating procedures for a high-profile arrest at Vancouver Airport at the time were to alert the minister responsible, but not in the pre-election year. It gets bumped up the food chain to the Prime Minister's office. And strategically, what better position for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau than to play the role of global statesman peacemaker between Beijing and Washington in this high-profile case. Unopposed political capital to be gained by doing that. However, there was a gross miscalculation because it turns out that the Prime Minister's advisors may not have known who Ms. Meng was.
Yeah.
In the result, this was on a Friday evening for decision Saturday morning. The regular staff was not there in Ottawa on duty. And so then the denouement attempt with President Trump's office revealed that in the White House, truth is a subset of information. And what better target than a high-profile, female, professional, successful person, which runs counter to then President Trump's worldview as an appropriate outcome, placed in the context of ongoing trade negotiations with China. How can you blame President Trump for nabbing a trade pawn to further his agenda? Now, knowing all of that, Ottawa at that time was negotiating with Washington on trade issues and had at that time tariff issues. Aluminum was mentioned. So why anger President T needlessly? Why not make no decision and allow the Canadian judicial system to kick the football down the path? So that's the context for 6 months, a year. Here's the changing, dramatic, factual new thing. All of this case revolves around a bank, HSBC, the bank that it serves as the banker to the Mexican drug cartel, the bank that paid literally billions in fines and penalties for fraud, violating banking rules, violating anti-money laundering protection, as well as anti-terrorist laws. That's HSBC. The mission for the Department of Justice in Washington was to pull the bank's license to operate on American soil. The bank was on a deferred prosecution agreement on parole, sort of, and any violation would trigger the loss of American soil as a venue for HSBC's operations. Well, what happened? As soon as President Biden came in, there was some arm twisting. There was a Hong Kong decision in court there. And in that settlement, very important facts arose. But here is the firecracker. In May 2021, HSBC announced voluntary withdrawal from American soil of its U.S. operations, except for high net worth clients. That's called a victory for Washington. Mission accomplished. The bank's not there anymore. The attack against HSBC, Huawei, Ms. Meng in American courts was to further this mission of getting rid of HSBC. Well, now the bank's not there anymore. It's shutting down. The litigation on American soil, not needed anymore. You alluded to plea bargaining. You bet. Absolutely, that plea bargaining process was in place. But again, until May, that plea bargain did not result in a victory until the bank agreed to go. So where are we today? Either, and here's the last point, because time is short, either the court renders decision and tosses this political football off our grid, or the politician courageously does the job assigned by Parliament and makes a decision based on new facts, new information and documentation that was not available almost 3 years ago when this whole thing started. It never should have started. It's unconscionable that the political minister will now not pull the trigger and cowardly awaits a court to do the minister's job assigned by statute.
Okay, Richard, I think these informations is extremely important, especially the part about the HSBC now withdrawing from the United States, because we normal people who don't really know legally what this really means. So the Americans are in fact achieving its objectives from whatever you see in terms of attack against Huawei or HSBC. Now, I began to look at the viewers' questions. I may just throw it randomly to all of the members, probably more so now at this point with the questions coming from Hugh Stevens, who is another, based in Vancouver, Margaret, former career diplomat as well, but also a senior vice president with Time Warner's before his retirement. He's asking us, among other people online, I mean, yes, Americans media have, quite a bit of influence on Canadian public relations, public opinion on China. What about the Chinese behavior in the South China Sea? More assertive posture overall over Taiwan, etc. How do you respond to that kind of dynamics? I think similar questions coming from Hugh to Daniel is, is that right? I guess here the question is the might is just the right in terms of you arrest me, I arrest you. People, I guess, are asking a little bit on the moral standing of the contrast here. So I'm just throwing out, Richard, you're welcome to comment as well. But Margaret, maybe Daniel, if you want to jump in on these questions.
Yeah, as an American citizen, as well as being a Canadian citizen, one can have many interests on your plate. But rather than focus on the negative, one should be focusing on the positive. You build bridges, you don't tear them down. So you don't raise issues that can go on and bleed for years to come. You resolve the irritant of the day and move forward geopolitically on strengthening trade, culture, sports, politics, and raw economics between the countries, because that helps everyone.
Daniel, go ahead. Unmute.
Sorry. Well, I think that was very well put by Richard just now. I mean, in terms of moral standing, everybody has problems, everybody has advantages, and I'm not sure, I mean, the big picture is China hasn't gone to war since 1979. Let's look at how many wars the U.S. has engaged in since then, and how many unjust wars. But anyway, I think the big picture is, I agree. Let's not focus on that. Let's just focus on the positive side, right? How much we could learn from each other, culturally, and how much we could have productive economic ties, and let's just deal with this in a pragmatic way. And it seems to me we need some sort of deal to release both the two Michaels, who I agree are unjustly held, along with Miss Meng, who should have been arrested in the first place.
Yeah. Margaret, I mean, here the question people are saying, broader question is, both Richard and Daniel emphasize on the positives, broader views, but some people I can see questions here coming in saying, we can't do those things, including today's Global Mail story about, doing more economic trade-related issues. They're saying, unless the two Michaels are done, released, we cannot go beyond that. I mean, what do you say to that? I mean, in terms of going beyond the so-called 3Ms issue to focus on other aspects of the bilateral relationship. Some people are just rejecting out that perspective outright. What do you say to them?
I first of all, I identify with the comments of Richard and Daniel very much so. I'm a realist, and Canadian foreign policy does hardly years from a realist perspective. And realism is limited objectives, non-interference, and restraint. It has nothing, it's not related to principles. And for that reason, it's very difficult for the two systems, the two ideas to resolve. But nonetheless, I think that a realist idea is particularly useful in our relationship since we are no longer a middle power. My very practical reason for not lecturing others is that we wouldn't accept their opinion or their influence on the challenges that face us domestically. We wouldn't consider it. And we would consider that it's a moral reason that we're not considering their view. But our position has to be that we are right and therefore are the moral right to impose our views on the others. But one of the enduring features of these situations that I'm thinking of, all of the Western incursions or American incursions in other societies, is that in retrospect, we find we knew a lot less about the situation than we thought so at the time we had the opinion. We find we know a lot less than we thought we did, yet at the time we were very confident about the rights and the wrongs of a situation and the solutions. And I think we need a lot more humility.
Yeah. Just one more question related to this from viewers, because Margaret, you mentioned in your opening statement about the restrictions beginning to show on, say, Canada, China scientific research, because we do have the Natural Science and Engineering Research Council of Canada. Their new research partnership guideline requires 2 Canadian security agencies coming in to do the review and the final decision making to have a say. There's a across the board protest among Chinese Canadian academics of Chinese origin, as well as of all stripes. The Canadians, and many coming out to say the definition is too wide. We're going to apply for partnership. We have to identify self-censorship here. I mean, is that the direction you see where we're going in your estimate? I have seen all the Canadian professors of Chinese origin across countries, different associations have written public letters through their universities. I mean, can you comment on that as viewers asking?
Well, I think it's a very backward step, certainly. It's not that we don't have to focus on preventing military, dual technology, military research that has military applications, we don't have to prevent it getting to China. We do. It's just that the current idea is to expand the risk. The American security agencies are focused on expanding the risk. The red circle is going around a very large amount of research. That's what we need to focus on and know how it's going to impact Canadian excellence in research in the specific field, and what can we do to offset the action that we're being required to take. It will require a lot of federal and academic efforts to get it right. It's a huge challenge for us, because what's at risk here is a potential brain drain from Canadian universities, as the research, which is the 401 corridor, has been the fount of our innovation leadership. And if we lose that because we don't have top access to the top people in the world, that's a big problem for us. So it's a very...
Let me add one thing. I mean, it's fine to have general principles that protect Canada's security, national interests, but it shouldn't be directed at a particular country. I mean, that just seems so odd, maybe even racist. I mean, why would they do that?
But China is not named. But everybody knows this is about China, right? This guideline will not be there. Of course, well, we have people who are sort of academics, say, of Iranian origin. Many deans university have actually written to Minister Champion to demand, at least if not withdrawing it, which I personally doubt that will happen, this new guideline, but at least to make it better defined. But on that score, Daniel, you're in China. Do you think, given all what's going on, and you want to focus on the positives, what do you think the Chinese government so far has been very, very official positions, very, very hard and firm? What do you think the Chinese government should do or could do in, it's a back and forth process, not up to one party, right? Are there things you think the Chinese government, if you have to advise them to do something to ease and to make the relations better? I know the 3M's issue has to be resolved, but other than that, what China can do to cushion it, to make it a little bit softer in terms of their image, in terms of their opinions in Canada?
Well, there were some things. I mean, when the COVID broke out in China in February last year, China was very happy that Canada was helping China, and there was some, and that was, it seemed to me there's little opening there for improved ties between Canada and China, but it didn't last long. So I think there are lots of things, educationally, economic, and health-wise, and of course, cooperating on climate change, that could be done. But at the end of the day, until this let's just call it 3 Michael's cases resolved, it's hard to see, lots of positive cooperation. So
now on 2 Michael's again, of course, this is a lot of Canadians are really concerned about this. I'm going back to Richard. I agree with what you said about new opportunities, new dynamics, but operationally speaking, Richard, if the court, the Judge Holmes next in a few months in October saying no extradition, I'm going to let her go, rejected from the court procedure, or she rules she's going to be extradited, but the minister with a new mandate, potentially with a liberal minority or majority, and saying I'm going to take the decision into my hands, not to extradite, do we lose dynamics or leverage, rather, to work with the Chinese to secure the release of 2 Michaels? Operationally, many people asking, how do you do it? If court unilaterally or the minister unilaterally release Ms. Meng, which you think the right thing to do, what about 2 Michaels, operationally speaking?
Well, operationally speaking, this is a question for China. Why ever would China want to hold on to 2 detained Michaels needlessly? It doesn't make any sense. So there's already a deportation order pronounced against one Michael, and I don't think it's secret that in the event of Ms. Meng's release, there will be a deportation from China. If they orchestrate it right before September 20th, there's political candy on the tarmac available. So it's entirely up to Ottawa to pull the trigger or not on extradition. If the court, for any reason, prematurely decides to render decision releasing Ms. Meng, I don't see any issue. I understand Reagan to Gorbachev, trust but verify. I get it.
Yes.
But and sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. This isn't a leap. It's a little bounce.
Okay. All right. I can see the clock is ticking. Maybe many questions, I can't finish them, but this is a good discussion. My understanding is we do have government people from both Canada and China watching our program. Hope some of your good advices and critical analysis will get into some of the policy considerations. And so finally, I'm reversing the opening statement sequence to ask Daniel first, and then Margaret, and then finally Richard. Each one of you, just maybe half a minute, if you have some final thoughts. Go ahead, Daniel. Your audio?
Sure.
Go ahead, Daniel. Yeah.
Right. I don't have particular final thoughts other than to say that I look forward to the natural order of things, which is that Canada and China would regard each other as friends, maybe even as kind of as brothers and sisters willing to sacrifice for each other.
Thank you, Daniel. Margaret?
Well, I'm more realistic, and I come from a realist tradition. I just would like it to be more rational and less fraught. And I think my forecast for I think that the two decisions, the two sentencings, or the one sentencing in China on the Michael Spavor is an indication perhaps that we're approaching some kind of negotiated settlement with respect to the exchange, and that I won't be surprised if once the court makes a decision one way or the other, and if it's in favor, if it rejects the application, that we'll see Madam Meng at the airport and the Michaels at the airport in Beijing, and that these sort of two-way certainty on getting them that situation, I think we'll see the return of the hostages.
Okay, Richard, final word.
Final word. I wake up daily to the nightmare of Ms. Meng's health. Her health is not good. She's got blood pressure issues and other things. If things go south and for any reason she passes on Canadian soil, that's the nightmare scenario. So the sooner this is over, the better.
Well, thank you, Richard. Of course, as we also are very concerned, not only about Meng, but also the two Michaels, their conditions are bad. And I guess the consensus we walk away with this panel, very excellent input from every one of you, is that we would like to see pragmatically both governments focus on the issue, don't wait for too long, don't prolong it, get the 3 M's issue resolved. And then beyond that, we would see a more independent Canadian foreign policy framework in general, vis-a-vis the United States, but especially regarding China. And we hope, if not before the election, that after the election, we'll have some kind of urgency to resolve the 3 M's issue, as well as having some kind of broader China policy and foreign policy framework. And so in that regard, the IPD, Institute for Peace and Diplomacy, have been working with a wide range of high-profile policymakers, academics, to put together a petition, in fact, to call for the election to focus on foreign policy issues, as well as to have China-focused, policy activities, and therefore we hope Daniel and Margaret and Richard, all of you could be at one point in the near future coming back to the APD platform. We do have a very good following on our panels, and we want to tap into each one of your expertise for the continuous focus on Canada-China relations and broader issues beyond that. So on behalf of APD, on behalf of the audience, we would like to thank you, all the three of you, very much. And I want to thank our audience for tuning in. As Bijian said in the beginning, this is recorded. It will be on the YouTube, on the website of APD by tomorrow at some point. Finally, again, thank you very much, Margaret. Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Daniel, especially from Beijing, quite late, past midnight.